Insane mass murderers, serial killers, and spree slayers did exist before the 1900s. You may have heard a lot about modern serial killers like Jeffery Dahmer and Ted Bundy, but surprisingly, these serial killers had much less of a chance of getting away with murder. Before the 1900s, serial killers could easily avoid being caught or found out due to a lack of technology and even superstition. Many serial killers in historic times were never caught and remained active. But what persuades some human beings to carry out horrific acts towards other human beings? Some say it's mental issues, growing up in a bad environment, or just greed. Yet others say it's something deep within our genes. Number 10. Gilles Garnier. Gilles Garnier, also known as the Werewolf of Dole, was a French serial killer known for his acts of homicide. He was a convicted werewolf rather than a murderer, which is not surprising since he lived during the 1500s. Shortly after being married, he moved to another location and struggled to find food for himself and his wife, which therefore encouraged him to cannibalize. Gilles confessed to having stalked 4 children and murdered them. He would then eat his victims, but clearly he wasn't smart as he committed such atrocities in public, having at least 50 witnesses who saw the murders. He was burned at the stake on January the 18th, 1573, for his horrific crimes. Number 9. William Burke and William Hare. The Burke and Hare murders took place in Edinburgh, Scotland. The series of murders were committed by William Burke, 1792 to 1829, and William Hare, 1792 or 1804 to after 1829, which lasted for approximately 10 months in 1828. Money motivated them as they sold the corpses to the infamous Dr. Robert Knox. Those corpses would then be used during Knox's lectures in front of quite a large audience, but it eventually ruined his reputation after it was found out he was buying these bodies that had been murdered. William Hare testified as a witness against William Burke in order to avoid prosecution. William Burke was then sent to his death on the 28th of January 1829 by hanging. Number 8. Harpe Brothers. Micachar Big Harpe, circa 1768 to 1799, and Wiley Little Harpe, circa 1770 to 1804, were buccaneers, highwaymen, and killers who first started their criminal activities during the American Revolutionary War by joining a rape gang which aimed to take advantage of the war. During the 1790s, the Harpe brothers resided in Knoxville, but were eventually driven out after being accused of brutally murdering another man who was found weighted with stones after being ripped open. Micachar Harpe and Wiley Harpe are considered to be the first recorded serial killers in United States history. Number 7. La Quintrala. Nicknamed after a flaring red hair, La Quintrala was tried for 40 murders during Chile's Colonia period in the 1600s. La Quintrala became notoriously well known throughout the world due to her involvement in colonial domination, exploitation, and misconduct. La Quintrala is of German, Spanish, and Amerindian descent, and she is an example of oppression among Spanish rule and colonization. She grew up in a religious and wealthy family, and in addition, she developed a major lust for sex, money, crime, and murder. La Quintrala is said to have occupied herself with slashing slaves as a personal interest, which caused her to get frequently fined by authorities during the 1600s. She is also notorious for poisoning a chicken and then feeding it to her father with the intent of poisoning him. Number 6. Peter Stumpp. Peter Stumpp holds many variations to his name, such as Peter Stumpf and Peter Stube. His birth date is not exactly known, but he lived during the 1500s and died on October the 31st, 1589 by execution for his crimes. Peter Stumpp is responsible for murdering and cannibalizing 18 victims in the Holy Roman Empire, and he was also accused of being a werewolf for his vicious crimes. During his trial, he confessed that he'd had an interest in black magic since he was 12 years old. Number 5. Darya Saltykova. Darya Saltykova was sentenced to life imprisonment after being accountable for 38 to 147 killings in Russia during the 18th century. Darya was a noblewoman who killed many of her own peasants who commonly consisted of females. She was born on November the 3rd, 1730 and died on the 27th of December 1801 and married a wealthy man from the Saltykova family but was widowed at the age of 26. She then inherited property from her husband after his death as well, and also the serfs who worked for the family. This gave her an easier ability to murder many people without being detected. There were 138 suspicious deaths reported by authorities, yet Darya was found guilty of beating, mutilating, and torturing 38 peasants. Number 4. Gilles de Rais. Although a convicted brutal murderer of 80 to 200 young children, Gilles de Rais was a Breton knight and a leader of the French army during the 1400s. His killing spree came to an end in 1440 after being involved in a major dispute with a clergyman, which clearly led to an investigation on Gilles Dahmer, and it eventually raised suspicion regarding his acts of murder. After officially retiring from military life, Gilles became interested in magical superstition and sought to seek out people who understood demon summoning. As a result of his satanic interest, his serial killing among children began. Leading into 1437, 40 bodies were already found. After murdering at least 80 children between the ages of 6 and 16, Gilles Dahmer was sentenced to death by hanging and burning. We're still unsure today whether he actually did any of this, but he was convicted of the crimes. Number 3. Peter Nears. Throughout the 16th century, Peter Nears was responsible for 544 killings in the Holy Roman Empire and was influenced by robbery, black magic, and supernatural belief to commit vicious acts of cannibalism, rituals, and slaying. Peter Nears was involved in murderous atrocities and banditries as an actual career which spanned about 15 years. He would raid most of the countryside with his associates to steal from families and individuals, and also then he would kill them and remove the fetuses of pregnant women, which he would use for magical rituals and cannibalism. He was detained by men who were cautious of this wanted killer. Peter Nears was tortured to death, rather deservedly so, on the 16th of September 1581. He died after 3 days. His flesh was stripped from his body and overwhelmed with heated oil. Then he was held above glowing coals. Finally, he was broken by the wheel and quartered. Number 2. Elizabeth Báthory. Elizabeth Báthory, famously known as the Blood Countess, was said to have been responsible for up to 650 killings, but was officially convicted of 80 murders in the Kingdom of Hungary during the late 1500s and the early 1600s. Many people testified a different amount of victims that Elizabeth may have been responsible for. Some say she murdered 30, 50, over 200, and even up to 650 individuals. After many years of research, investigators suggest that she may have actually been a victim of a conspiracy, as many of the accusations were politically inclined. She was never sentenced to death, but was imprisoned by her family until she was found dead by a guard in 1614. Number 1. Thug Behram. Thug Behram was a well-known assassin and thug in India who lived during the late 1700s and early 1800s. He is suspected of murdering a staggering amount of people, taking the record for the most in history, with his number of victims expected to be 931. He spent 50 years committing these acts of homicide by strangulation using a ceremony cloth. Thug Behram was part of a thuggy cult which was responsible for many vicious acts of robbery, assassinations, and serial murder. The English word thug derives from the Indian word thuggy. So I'm not going to ask if you enjoyed that video, but I do hope you found it interesting. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below. Do not forget to subscribe, and as always, thank you for watching.